You've probably noticed it in yourself, or maybe you've watched it happen to someone close to you. There's a moment when someone you know to be reasonable, grounded, maybe even a little guarded, suddenly becomes unrecognizable. They ignore red flags they'd spot for anyone else. They rearrange their entire life around someone they barely know. They make decisions that, from the outside, look reckless or naive. And when you try to point it out, they can't even hear you. It's like they're living in a different reality, one where the usual rules don't apply. Most people chalk this up to poor judgment or emotional immaturity. They'll say things like love is blind, or they're just being stupid. But that explanation misses something crucial. Because the person making these choices isn't always young or inexperienced. Sometimes they're intelligent, self-aware, successful in other areas of their life. And yet, when love enters the picture, it's as if their brain shuts off entirely. What we're really talking about is the psychology of people who lose all logic when they're in love. And it's not what most people think it is. This isn't about being foolish or weak. It's about how certain brains respond to the neurochemical flood that comes with romantic attachment. When someone falls in love, their brain doesn't just feel different. It actually operates differently. Studies using fMRI scans show that romantic love activates the same reward pathways as cocaine. The ventral tegmental area, which governs motivation and craving, lights up intensely. Meanwhile, the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for judgment, critical thinking, and impulse control, shows reduced activity. So when someone says they can't think straight around the person they love, they're not exaggerating. Their capacity for logical reasoning has genuinely decreased. But not everyone experiences this to the same degree. Some people can fall in love and still maintain perspective. They feel the pull, but can step back and evaluate. For others, that distance is impossible. The question is why. It often comes down to early attachment patterns. If you grew up in an environment where love felt conditional, unpredictable, or tied to performance, your nervous system learned to treat connection as scarce. And when something feels scarce, your brain prioritizes it above almost everything else. You don't just want love. You need it to feel safe. So when someone offers it, or even hints at offering it, your system floods with urgency. The logical part of your brain that would normally say slow down or let's evaluate this gets overridden by a deeper survival response that says don't lose this. This is especially true for people who experienced inconsistent caregiving as children. Psychologists call this anxious attachment. If a parent was sometimes warm and sometimes unavailable, you learned that closeness is fleeting. You developed hypervigilance around connection. As an adult, that translates into an intense focus on romantic partners. You read into every text, every silence, every shift in tone. And because your nervous system is wired to expect loss, you cling harder when you feel someone pulling away. Logic becomes a background noise you can't quite hear over the panic. Now, this doesn't mean one way of loving is better or worse than another. People who maintain logic in love aren't necessarily healthier. Sometimes they're avoidant. Sometimes they've just never felt something strong enough to challenge their control. And people who lose themselves aren't automatically codependent or broken. They're often deeply feeling, deeply loyal, capable of profound intimacy. The issue isn't the intensity. It's whether that intensity leaves room for self-preservation. Here's the paradox, though. The very thing that makes these people lose logic is also what makes them capable of extraordinary devotion. They don't love half-heartedly. They don't hedge. When they commit fully, and that kind of presence is rare. But the cost is real, because when you can't access your own judgment, you become vulnerable to people who recognize that and use it. You stay too long in relationships that hurt you. You ignore your own needs in favor of keeping the peace. You become so focused on being chosen that you forget to choose yourself. And there's something else. People who lose logic in love often don't realize they're doing it until it's over. In the moment, everything feels justified. The sacrifices feel worth it. The overlooked red flags feel like misunderstandings. It's only later, sometimes years later, that they look back and think, what was I thinking? But even then, they might do it again, because the pattern isn't about intelligence. It's about wiring. It's about what your nervous system learned to prioritize when you were too young to have a say in it. This is not a flaw in character. It's a feature of your development, an understanding that can change how you relate to yourself. Because once you see the pattern, you can start to interrupt it, not by forcing yourself to be cold or detached, but by learning to notice when your logic has gone offline. When you're making decisions based on fear of loss rather than genuine desire. When you're interpreting someone's behavior through the lens of your own anxiety rather than what's actually happening. You don't have to stop feeling deeply. You don't have to become someone who loves less. But you can learn to stay present with yourself even when your nervous system is screaming that connection is everything. You can learn to pause, to check in, to ask yourself if the person you're losing logic over is actually safe to lose logic over. Because not everyone deserves that level of access to you. If any of this feels familiar, if you've ever looked back at a relationship and wondered how you got so lost in it, you're not alone. And you're not broken. You're someone whose brain learned early on that love is the most important thing. And sometimes that belief becomes so loud it drowns out everything else. But now that you see it, you can start to make different choices. Not because the old ones were wrong, but because you deserve to feel safe in your own love, not just in someone else's. And if this resonated, there's more to explore about how your mind works and why you are the way you are.